Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by 818 Tequila. Delicious and smooth tequila, made in harmony with the earth. 818 Tequila, imported by 818 Spirits Manhasset, New York. 40% alcohol by volume. Drink responsibly.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. It's Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. We're talking with some friends from Durango, Colorado, and let's go around the room and introduce them. So let's start with Dave.
Yeah, my name's Dave Thibodeau, and I'm a founder and CEO of Ska Brewing down in Durango, Colorado.
All right, and Bill?
Hey, I'm Bill Graham. I'm also one of the co-founders of Ska Brewing, but I am over in Palisade, Colorado, at Peach Street Distillers in Mount Vines.
All right. So our good friend Emily Hudo, Rad Craft Beer, I got to know her really well through the Craft Maltsters Guild, and we've done quite a few shows about craft malt. Thanks to her. Thank you, Emily. She's been telling me about Ska Brewing for a while. And, you know, when I think of ska, I kind of forgot that I used to listen to it a while ago. And so I've been dying to meet you guys. And I'm happy that I am now. So why don't you start with us, Dave? Just tell us about Ska Brewing and why you guys got started. And tell me more about Durango, Colorado. I don't know what the West Slope is. I've actually never been to Colorado. I think most of our listeners are on the East Coast.
Okay, yeah. So Bill and I grew up together, and we got really into home brewing in high school. Actually, back in the mid '80s, we opened Ska Brewing in 1995. So we've been around for almost 27 years now. But when we first got into home brewing, there weren't any homebrew shops in Colorado yet. Obviously, it was really novel to be able to make your own beer and, of course, give it to people as gifts with the funny labels that we made, because nobody had even heard or seen or tasted such a thing at the time. And yeah, I mean, it was a cool, unique thing. And we got the ska tie because we were punk ass kids, but we had a routine when we would homebrew. We kind of had two criteria. One was that we had to listen to ska music because that's just what we were really into at the time. And then we had to drink our previous batch of homebrew. And if we didn't do those two things, then the batch we were working on clearly wasn't going to turn out. So those were the criteria whenever we homebrewed. And then, you know, Bill and I ended up going to college up in the Front Range of Colorado. So Durango is about 6 hours from Denver. So Denver Boulder area is what they call the Front Range of Colorado. And then the area on the west side of Colorado from Palisade, where Bill is now, down to Durango, it's about a 4-hour drive, and that area is called the Western Slope. So Bill and I grew up in the Front Range, and we both went to college up there. Bill went to CU, and I went to a college in Denver called Metropolitan State University. And by the time we graduated, we knew we wanted to live in Durango. We were familiar with it. It's a beautiful little place. And we moved down here to we didn't know we were going to start a brewery, but obviously we were still brewing beer all the time. And when we did actually get up and running in 95, we were talking about what were we going to name it. And when we were making those beers originally and putting those funny labels on it, we always would put brewed and bottled in Bill's Kitchen Boulder or Dave's Kitchen Denver by Ska Brewing Company, and that was just something we put on the labels and never really thought much about it. But then once we were in Durango, I remember talking to Bill and I was thinking, gosh, at the time there were a few breweries, but they were all named after dogs or mountains, and I was like, what mountain or river are we going to name our brewery after? And Bill's like, no, dude, we got to name it Ska Brewing Company. So we stuck with it. And so I hear before we hopped on the air, you had mentioned, God, that seems kind of crazy. And I remember people telling us we were shooting ourselves in the foot. But Durango's kind of a rural cowboy town. So we just told everybody it was an acronym for shit kicking ales when we started out. So it just depended on who we were talking to. But so there you go. So that's kind of how we got started and ended up in Durango. And it's just a beautiful place, right in the mountains, kind of where the mountains meet the desert. We've got a big river called the Animas running right through the middle of town. So we've got all of Colorado's outdoor activities at our beck and call. And it's a great spot to have a business, have a brewery.
Yeah, so way back when...
Dave touched on a couple of things. Sorry, I need to interrupt there. He touched on a couple of things, but we moved there to ski, man. I mean, it's right there in the mountains. And so we're ski bums we're also ska freaks. Also, the timing of this might sound funky in the year 2022, but this was 1986 when we first made those batches of beer, and we were really jamming out to that third wave of ska. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a little more backstory.
To give some of my listeners who, a little perspective, what was the third wave of ska? What were some of the bands that you were listening to? Because I know you have bands that play out in Durango sometimes too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. There was, ska basically, it could be argued that there's a fourth wave happening, or maybe that it's been happening for a while. But the three original waves of ska, where it started in the late, in the 60s, really, in Jamaica, and it was kind of a blend of traditional R&B from the West and the United States combined with some Caribbean rhythms. And then as that it eventually evolved into reggae. So reggae wouldn't exist if it weren't for ska. In fact, Bob Marley and the Wailers were a ska band before reggae was a music genre. And as the music got to evolve, it got popular and kind of jumped the pond over to England. And then a bunch of working class kids, black kids and white kids,
the original
started forming
skinheads.
These bands. And they called it the two-tone era, or the second wave. And the reason it was two-tone was it was a unity thing amongst the races. So it was black kids and white kids, working class kids starting these bands. And then and that's where a lot of our artwork has black and white checkers to it. And a lot of that's from the second wave. And then when it finally got popular,
that's why there's that checker image, the black and white checks.
Yeah, that's where it all comes from, was that second wave of ska. So we've used that since we first started. But that was a big thing in that second wave of ska over in England. And then the third wave was when it kind of hopped the pond back to the United States and kind of started mixing with punk rock. And you started getting punk rock with horns, and they had that uptick on the beat, and it got a lot faster. And some of those bands, you and I were just talking, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, which played our 25th/26th anniversary here just in September. And some of the other bands were the Toasters, which are still around and good friends of ours. And
Pie Tasters.
Pie Tasters. Pie Tasters is a good one.
Still.
And those guys actually, speaking of New York City, the Pie Tasters and the Toasters used to actually have a record label in New York City called Moon Records.
Oh, wow.
And they had a little retail shop there. And so when we started, Moon Records was a big thing for Bill and I. Those were the bands we were really into, along with the two-tone or second wave bands, which were bands like the Specials, the English Beat, the Selector. So little back history there on ska music.
Yeah,
I like that. I want to.
A lot of
you
those
go, Bill.
third
Keep
wave.
going.
Jimmy, I keep having to talk over you, man. Give me a second here.
Sorry, that's my fault.
No,
I'm a rambler.
that's how we're gonna do it, man. I want you to talk.
But those third wave bands, like, so more a lot of them were coming out of the West too, West Coast. So probably the most famous coming out of the West that you would know is No Doubt with Gwen Stefani heading them up.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That's
right.
cool. So going way back then, like with brewing and stuff. Early on, were you both brewing? At some point, do you guys still both brew? Did you guys evolve? I mean, you've been doing this a long time. So was one of you more drawn to brewing than the other? Because you guys have been partners a long time.
We've been around forever. I used to like head up the production end of things, but there was, understand, man, it was just Dave and I, and this was a really rapidly growing little, brewery and microbrewery is what everybody called it back then. Now it's craft brewing, etc. But we kind of got drawn into different parts of it. Dave's forte is, as you can tell from this, is talking to people and communications, and so he kind of naturally gravitated towards the sales end of things. I'm better off, voice for or face for radio here, and kind of hold up in the back with the boys. But so I ended up doing more of the brewing hands-on things, but it was Dave still did a lot of it. We did a little bit of everything, particularly at the beginning, and then over time you kind of morph into the roles that like just need to be filled. And for us, it was kind of a hole there in the laboratory, like maintaining the yeast, making sure that like the beers that we were putting out weren't contaminated, stuff like that. So I ended up just by need, not by skill, doing a lot of the lab work and working with the brewers that way. And thank God I'm not the one back there anymore. The School of Hard Knocks will teach you a lot, but it's pretty hard to get that chemistry, biology background out of a book,
Wow, that's great. And Dave, for you, like as you guys were growing, I mean, this was Ska Brewing. How big was it, and how many people work for you, and when did it change? Was it 5 years in, 10 years in?
Yeah, we had another friend who joined us as our third partner. His name is Matt Vincent, and after our first year in business, and he was, we were fortunate enough. He was the only other home brewer that we knew of in Durango, and he actually was working at Durango Brewing Company. So bringing him on after a year was a big help. And I'll definitely say Bill he's selling himself short there. He's a much better technical brewer and distiller by far beyond what I ever was. And so, yeah, it was, those first 5 years, it was pretty much the three of us doing a lot of it. We had another guy that was helping with deliveries and another guy that was ultimately our head brewer, but we all kind of shared a lot of the duties. And then in the early aughts, we really started ramping up, and there was a period of, because when we opened, that was kind of that first bigger wave. And in the later 90s, mid to later 90s, you did see a lot of those breweries kind of drop off. The trajectory was still up, but a number of breweries went out of business. And then the long, steep trajectory really started to kick in and just got steeper and steeper over that next decade until, the early 2000 teens. But in that time, we built the building in 2008 that we're currently in. We call it the Ska Brewing World Headquarters. It's only about we pretend like we're a lot bigger than we are, but we're about 70 employees, and we sell beer in most of the states surrounding Colorado, about 10 other states, and we actually do a fair amount of international sales. We had a number of things happen quite a few years ago that really kind of launched us in Sweden, of all places, through some chance meetings. But I don't know if you're familiar with Sweden, but they have it's a monopoly, basically. All the liquor stores are government owned, and they actually refer to it as the monopoly or the Systembolaget. And And, once you're really in there, there's 400 of those stores. So you can do limited launches there if you're lucky enough to win that listing. But once you're really in there, there's 400 stores. So Sweden's actually our second biggest market after Colorado. It really has done well for us for a lot of years, mostly with one beer, our flagship modus operandi. But yeah, so it's a nice, we've got a distribution company too. Actually, our wives own that. And then the brewery itself has about 70 employees. And we have a nice pub restaurant side to it here in Durango. And then we do, basically self-distribution around southwestern Colorado, and then wholesale distribution in the surrounding states.
Wow. Hey, let's talk a little bit about your beers. I don't know if Bill, you want to tell me a little bit. Tell me about Modus Operandi and a couple of the other beers that people know you for.
Sure. Modus was, it started off as a beer that we were making for the local ski area. And the local ski area, which is Purgatory Resort, had a bar there called Purgy's, and we made a beer called Purgy's Pale Ale. And over time, we just kept kind of playing around with Purgy's Pale Ale. And originally, we wanted to get I wanted to do a single hop Cascade beer, and this was a long time ago. So Cascade being the hops, and just that one variety into a pale ale, or at the time, morphing into that IPA, range. You got to understand, this was years ago, so IPA wasn't quite the ridge that it is now, or was, even just a few years ago. But well, we played around with that, and we kept brewing it, and then we started moving into this new building that Dave mentioned, and the size of everything really ramped up, from like a 10-barrel brew house up to a 30-barrel brew house, 3 times the size, 240-barrel fermenters, all these things. Oh, yeah. Stuff was changing rapidly in Colorado, particularly along the marijuana front, and how legalization was about to happen, some other things. And really, so that conversation of trying to make a single hop pale ale kind of fell to the wayside of how can we make this thing taste like a big juicy bong hit? So we ramped it up with a bunch of C hops, the Cascades and the Columbus, and go ahead. We added some backbone to it because the IBUs are so big there that it needed quite a bit of alcohol and some sweetness to kind of hopefully balance it a little bit. So some caramel malts. Anyway, we went for it, man. We made this gigantic bong hit in a beer bottle, and we were like, you know what? It would be even cooler is let's throw it in a beer can. So we're the second craft brewery in cans, right behind Oscar Blues here, our buddies in Colorado, by about a couple of weeks. And we threw the modus operandi into cans, and man, that blew everybody's mind. Right? You had a bong hit in a can, and it was this giant IPA. So it really quickly moved us into one of our flagship beers and has stayed there ever since. So I don't know. That was a little bit of everything without getting too nerded out.
No, it's good. We'll talk about Colorado, so now we can talk about cannabis a little bit.
Yeah, right? No, man, we're talking weed. Cannabis is come on.
Cannabis is East Coast for investors, bro.
Yeah, right?
But how do weed, legal weed and beer go hand in hand, since it became legal? Is there
Dave can probably talk about it because we're a little more involved with it than just me joking around being, talking weed and whatnot. But at the beginning, it was a little nerve-wracking, man. It was what is this really going to do, to our market? Are people even, are they going to drink beer? Are they just going to smoke pot? What does this look like? Yeah. But of course, there's room, and of course we were we're fans. So we kind of, welcomed it and tried to embrace as much of the, culture as we could. And even to the point where there was talk where we were going to, maybe split Modus out into like a style of weed, like a branded marijuana that you could buy from the dispensaries. But Dave's got more of that, and we actually make a few products there at the brewery still that are kind of cannabis based.
Yeah, we actually, I mean, it was pretty interesting because all of our lives, not all of our lives, but beginning like in college and maybe even high school, I would say we were advocates of legalization, and I think once like that actually started to become a reality, and we had our brewery up and running and doing well, it became an issue, and I didn't know how I felt about it, like morally, ethically, as far as business goes. Suddenly we had something competing with what was our bread and butter, being craft beer. And so it was a big concern, and it was definitely a conversation that we had at length, when legalization first happened out here in Colorado. But since our other partner, Matt Vincent, he's spun off. He's still an equal partner of ours. It's still the three of us that have been here all these years. He started a ska fabricating company. He makes depalletizers for craft breweries all around the world. But he's also a partner in a business called Ojai Beverages, and they make both CBD and THC sparkling waters. And we're actually there. We actually make the CBD version, can it, and distribute it. So we do have our fingers in there a little bit. Of course, there's not really much crossover as far as the legalities go on the THC side. So we can't have THC here at the brewery, but the CBD side, it's interesting, and selling, CBD sparkling water around Southwest Colorado, and making it and canning it. So we kind of have a little bit of all of that going on, but it's been enough years now that it's really something that's, I don't think about it every day like I used to. I mean, it's not so unique now. It's just life,
Yeah, and New York State's just going through it now. A lot of people are having the same conversations. I know people that own a bar who are now going out and renting a cafe space because they want to be lined up for a consumption cafe, which is a whole nother story. But I'm glad we talked about this, because I'm going to have you guys back on again with some New York people, and we are going to talk about weed versus beer. There was one time I wanted to talk. We used to talk a lot to hop growers, and again, like on the last 8-10 years, there was a growth of small hop growers in New York when there hadn't really been any for a long time. And I saw an article a few years ago about Colorado hop growers, and it said that there was some challenge, and I wondered if the challenge for the growers was is it better to grow marijuana? If you're a small grower, are you going to choose? So I was wondering about the impact on the supply chain. If you're a small grower, are you going to choose growing cannabis over hops if you're able to do either? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that Bill's probably got a different perspective on that from me, because he's actually in a part of Colorado that, I mean, it's one of the two designated viticultural regions that we have in Colorado, but it's a big fruit growing region. You probably haven't heard of Palisade peaches in New York, but in the western half of the country, that name has some cachet when you're talking about fruit and grapes. And Bill's a hop farmer himself. I mean, a grape farmer, or a vintner, I guess that's a winemaker. But he's got his own vineyard up there in Palisade, and he's got close relationships with a lot of the farmers in that region. But thinking about some of the people that I know that grow hops here in Colorado, I think it really comes down. It's a question of, I mean, first of all, do you understand weed at that level where you want it to be part of your life? I think I personally, I don't indulge nearly like to the level that I used to. It doesn't mean as much to me anymore. I still believe in legalization, obviously, but if it were up to me, I would choose hops without even thinking too much about it, assuming I could grow the varieties or whatever, that the other specifics were there, grow the varieties that I wanted to. But I think about some of the hop farms between here and where Bill lives, and would they grow weed? The funny thing is, at the same time, between where Bill lives and where I live, there are quite a few marijuana farms. Some obviously just hemp or cannabis or CBD, some obviously THC. There is no shortage of marijuana farms around Colorado. You see them everywhere, and there's a lot of indoor. If you're a retailer, you have to have your own grow that you're associated with, a grow being the growing operation. So I think it really depends. It's still somewhat of a fledgling industry, and there's a lot of logistics there, and I think rules are going to continue to change and evolve. So I think it's a pretty complicated subject. I'd love to, if you had some experts that were just beating the topic around, it would be a fun conversation to be part of. I don't know, Bill, maybe you've got more insight being in a region where you just spit on the ground and shit grows,
The spit plants pop right up.
Well, you're chewing the seeds all the time, so maybe your spit's got seeds in them.
Right? No, I tend to agree with like kind of what Dave said there is like, what is like the individual grower's passion, because in Colorado, at least, we've seen kind of the gamut. And like Jimmy, you talked about you read an article where growing hops was kind of a challenge. And that's part of like Colorado is, you got, Dave talked about it at the beginning, you got the western slope and the eastern slope, and they're totally different microclimates, within the same state. So it's like really difficult to be kind of, talking about the state as a whole with this. But I know that some of the hop trials over on the eastern slope have had, everything from hail wipe it out to tornadoes to, because you got to think from, that Denver area, that Denver Boulder area, all the way out, the next stop is, Kansas, Nebraska. So tornadoes come ripping through that region and wipe out the hop fields. But over here where we're at, there's some more hops being grown. I think it's just been challenging because of the climate. We're a little bit hot, we're a little bit dry, we're a little bit south. So it's so much easier, I think, to get, good quality crops of hops out of the Pacific Northwest, out of the Yakima region. And this area that I'm in is really similar to that Yakima region. There's a lot of cherry farms here. There's a lot of grapes. Yakima, same deal, cherry farms and or cherry orchards, excuse me. And, there's a lot of winemaking. That Washington winemaking area is right there as well as this Colorado area. So it's similar, but I think we're just a little bit hot on that end. And then the way that kind of transitions to weed, or whether it's THC or the CBD, what they're trying to grow, hemp or I guess cannabis, but it's weird. Colorado, it's kind of went from that, like everybody jumped on the bandwagon and was growing THC weed to sell at the dispensaries. Then the state got on board and changed some of the laws so that if you're going to sell THC from your dispensary, you have to control it and grow it. So that put the kibosh on just, Joe Guy putting the seed in the ground. And then all of a sudden there was the CBD rush and bales and bales of hemp being grown. And I think, hemp is where it's at, but we're still missing some of that infrastructure of the fiber. What do you do with the rest of the plant? There's all these other things that we still need to kind of play catch up on. So I'm not giving you much of an answer. I know that hops are challenging, and I know that growing marijuana or growing the hemp is it's always changing. The landscape's always changing, or because it's new. It seems like if they could figure out a way to tax it and get involved with it, they do. And then that changes the landscape of what's left for the farmers and the dispensaries and the people that want to sell it.
Oh yeah. So as you guys were growing from just Ska Brewing, tell me about opening up the spirits company.
Sure.
What was the impetus, and
well,
how did that fit your interest?
Very much the same story as the brewery, man. We were screwing. It was kind of because we could. We were screwing around, and I took a quarter barrel keg and cut the top off, talked to our sanitary welder guy, showed him some plans to make a reflux column. We busted the window out of a Toyota Celica that was like abandoned somewhere, or maybe it was a different brand than Celica, but something, you get the idea. Broke the window out because the safety glass broke into these little perfect squares on that particular brand. And those were the rashing rings that we ended up packing the column on this quarter barrel keg with. And then we kind of lucked out too. We had a friend that made a batch of cider, and he was a brewer. And the cider, I forget what it's called. Dave, maybe you could help me out, but it can't be all just apple juice. It has to have a certain amount of barley. I think 50% barley, something like that, in order to be made at a brewery. So it's kind of a hybrid beer, and these are
What's that, like a sizer? Is that what they call it?
Kind of, Dave,
Yeah, and the deal was when you, if you were a licensed either brew pub or manufacturing brewery in Colorado, then anything you made had to have 50% malt in it. And so we had friends that were professional brewers that were brewing what they were calling ciders, even though it was half barley, because that was the only legal way they could produce it, because to actually have a cider manufacturing, that's a wine license in Colorado. So they were a brew pub in Denver that was making a cider that was half barley, but they called it their cider, or I think sizer. But they called it a cider, and that was really it. It was a legality thing.
Sure. Well, long story short was you kind of blew it, and it wasn't tasting very good. So we had this endless supply of apple-based beer or liquid that we could kind of play around with, this quarter barrel still that we had built. So we just kind of started making some different batches in my barn. Home distillings at that time was illegal. I don't think it's changed. I think it still is illegal. But anyway, we were maybe doing something illegal up in my barn with this quarter barrel still, and just having, cranking up the bluegrass music and distilling some stuff out and trying to see what we could make. And anyway, over time, kept distilling, trying to get it more perfected, understanding how the oak interplays with the spirit and that aging process. And then lo and behold, we ran across a distilling seminar at Michigan State University. So Dave and I and a third guy, different from the brewery, packed up and went out to Michigan State and spent a weekend distilling. We discovered some of the different stills, different processes, those kind of things, and at that point in time in Colorado, there was one other distillery. That at that point in time there was zero. But anyway, by the time we found a space, found the still, felt like we at least had a kind of a clue on how to take beer and turn it into concentrated beer, that we could go for it. And I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the story of the distillery is like one brewery grew into another, kind of.
Wow. Hey, Dave, did you just crack a beer?
I did.
What'd you crack?
Good ear. Good ear. What did I crack?
Yeah, you got to tell me more about your beers.
I'm actually, yeah, this one's one of my favorite beers. This is called Pink Vapor Stew. I know it's kind of a gross name, but it's actually a lyric in another band. I don't think you could quite call them a third wave ska band, but they are heavily ska influenced, and they're called Fishbone. Big influence on a lot of the bigger bands that are around today. But they've always been kind of behind the scenes. But Pink Vapor Stew is a lyric out of there. But this beer was based on a favorite juice that I like to make at my house. I have a juicer that I use all the time, and my favorite juice is ginger, beets, carrots, and apples. And so I asked our brew team to make a sour version of that juice as a beer a number of years ago, and they did it a few years ago, and it's one of our regular beers. It's got its own kind of cult following. Obviously, it's a sour beer. It's bright pink. It's really earthy. It's got that dirty side of beets to it. It definitely tastes like beets. It looks like beets, but it's got that really earthy dirtiness to it, which I love. And then like the ginger and the apple, you don't really taste the carrot, but the ginger kind of shines a little bit, and then the apple just smooths it out. And it's like I said, it's got a cult following. It's a big one in our tasting room here. It's the kind of thing, it's so pretty. When people see it, the person sitting next to them has to try it. And whether they're a sour beer fan or a beet fan, which there's a lot of people that are neither.
I haven't heard of a beet. I would like that as a juice myself. I haven't heard of a beet beer.
It's delicious.
Do they juice everything and then put it in with the brewing, or are they using whole?
No, the only thing we actually juice here is the ginger root itself. And so yeah, we use a juicer on the ginger root, and then the beets are actually dehydrated. So we kind of reconstitute those, and then we add apple juice, and the carrots are the same as the beets. So it's they're all in there, but they're all kind of come in different forms as we add them to the beer.
Wow, Pink Vapor. Hey, when you guys started, looking back now, how important was it that you guys had been homebrewing for fun?
I think
totally vital.
Bill, you tell me if you agree with this. Yeah, I would say vital, not just technically and being at the front edge of really kind of learning. It's not uncommon at all now to know professional brewers that started out as home brewers, but back then we were the few pro brewers that we knew were kind of like, wow, you guys are jumping into this from home brewing. And it seemed like a giant step and a giant risk. But the beauty of it in my mind, and obviously like Bill mentioned, I'm a sales and marketing kind of guy, but I also really like the life that I live, and I don't take it for granted. And I think home brewing has always been something, no matter who you talk to, that's been fun. And it's a process and an experience, and it's, there's a reason they call it brew day. And, you get your buddies together, you're out in the garage, you're in the kitchen or whatever, and it's an event. And it's fun, whether you've got a certain music you listen to or your weird superstitions that go along with it. And I think what's cool about what we've done particularly was we never really changed as we went into professional brewing and then grew. We're still listening to the same fun music. We're still dancing, we really enjoy the process. And I think, ultimately that finds its way into the beer. And you could, that's maybe kind of a way to talk about maybe terroir as far as brewing goes. It's part of the environment, and it finds its way into the final beer. And I think it's crucial, our home brewing background, how we got into it, because the process, the fun, the energy all becomes part of the final product. And I think people can really, it resonates with people.
Oh yeah. Bill?
No, totally, man. Dave hit on everything. It's like, it's that, I would just describe it as the culture. And it's like, let the factory brewers work at Budweiser,
All right. Hey, we're off to a great start. We're going to take a short break. Be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio.
I'm Chava Periban, co-host of Agave Road Trip on HRN, here to talk about 818 Tequila. 818 creates their tequila using traditional methods at a family-owned and operated distillery in Jalisco, Mexico. From the blue agave they grow to their recycled glass bottle, 818 emphasizes the earth's importance in all they do. Their distillery runs on biomass and solar power, which means they don't rely as much on fossil fuels and are able to reduce their carbon footprint. Their labels, corks, and boxes are all certified by the Forest Stewardship Council as coming from sustainably managed forests. 818 is a proud member of 1% for the Planet, through which they support HRN as well as Sacred, my organization in Jalisco, where together we transform agave byproducts and water waste into adobe bricks that are donated to local infrastructure projects, like a local library in Zapotitlan de Vadillo. Visit drink818.com to learn more about their sustainability efforts and find 818 near you. 818 has been part of so many magical nights for me, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. 818 Tequila, imported by 818 Spirits, Manhasset, New York. 40% alcohol by volume. Drink responsibly.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Become a member and support us at heritageradionetwork.org. There's over 30 shows about farms, chefs, cocktails, and beer and more on heritageradionetwork.org. So we're talking with the guys from Ska Brewing, Bill and Dave. And before we did the recording, I got inspired and I listened to the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And I'd never listened to them before, but I'm getting a sense of what Ska Brewing's like. And our friend Emily Hudo from Radcraft Beer, who introduced us, she was saying that was a big part of the scene in Durango. Is it just because of you guys? You know, or is there really like a ska fan scene going on there? Or that's just you guys?
I think, I mean, honestly, like I mentioned before, it was it's a rural town, and it does have a small liberal arts college, Fort Lewis, and that's about 4,000 students. So some of those students are definitely familiar with it, more so now probably than when we started. But I would say in Durango, I wouldn't say it's a scene. And that what's really interesting about ska music is there is definitely a scene associated with it. And it's things like scooters, Vespas, Lambrettas, dress, the way people dress, the checkers. There's so much to it. And then it ties itself to, like you had mentioned, the jam and mod music. And you think about mods versus rockers as far as like motorcycles versus scooters and all these different sorts of scenes that can be tied to ska music. But Durango definitely doesn't have a scene like that. But I think a lot more people in Durango are aware of ska music and what it is, probably because of us. I mean, kind of going out on a limb, but like I said, we said it was an acronym for shit kicking ales because that just made a lot more sense to people. But it's interesting, like you mentioned the Boss Tones, and when we had our anniversary party, we always have a pretty well-known ska band play our anniversary party every September. And the Boss Tones have been around for years and years. In fact, the first time Bill and I saw them was in 1992, and they broke up just a couple shows after our anniversary party this year. And but the people that come to our anniversary party are from all over the country, actually all over the world, and that is a scene that you don't see on any other day in Durango. There is a lot of real ska freaks and craft beer freaks. We invite a lot of our friends that are professional brewers to pour beer from their respective breweries at that party. But it's a ska scene for sure, but only for one day a year.
Oh, that's fun. Hey, I've got a question from Emily. It says, ask them about the words on the lips of their cans. What is that?
Well, I was Bill mentioned it earlier, just behind Oscar Blues, we actually started canning beer back in 2003. So as far as craft brewing goes, we were really the second brewery, just by, like Bill said, a few weeks to start canning our beer. And we thought it was pretty novel at the time, but we put a set of words around the top of the can. We're kind of big on inside jokes. And so we put a bunch of words around the top of the can that they were either an inside kind of joke, or they were something you had to look up or Google, or maybe it was tied to what we believed the idea behind cans was, at least for us at the time. Maybe, how accessible they are if you're living in a community that's really thrives on outdoor activities, for example. So I think we had like rafting or fishing maybe on that first can, but then we also just had random weird stuff. Like the Modus can has HHH on it, and HHH is a reference to the Hash House Harriers, which that's something everybody could Google if they're not aware of it. But it's basically a drinking club with a running problem. And that's an international thing started by an expat like in Malaysia in the 50s or something. But Bill and I were both Hash House Harriers. So we have all these kind of inside references, and it's fun to just have. And Bill, I don't know if you recall doing this, but we would just have these brainstorming sessions about what the words around the lip of the can were going to be. And it's been a fun thing. We still do it to this day with every beer we make.
Wow.
Sure. And the whole point with even back then getting into cans was, craft beer, particularly at that time, was so glass heavy. And in Colorado, where 90% of your life seems to be outdoors, be it skiing, hiking, backpacking, like you said, fishing, rafting, windsurfing, you name it. It made sense for us to get into cans. So we wanted to highlight that, even golf, like you just don't, broken glass hurts your dog and stuff, and it really it really made us want to try to push people away from glass. The efficiency of cans, everything about it. You ship a pallet, it's 28% more beer, it's 28% more efficient. All these great things that coming out of aluminum for beer in particular. So I think that was like a lot of the motivation. Then the other thing, like Dave said, is like I don't know if we just suffer from boredom or what it is, but it seems like we always get together and come up with these goofy ideas of like, what's the most esoteric thing that nobody's going to understand that we can put on this thing, and challenge ourselves. So
I'll tell you, I'll make a request. One of your cans next year, just put on the lip, put broken glass hurts your dog.
Right?
I like that. It might be the title of this show. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Hey,
is that not the most Colorado thing you've ever heard?
It's thoughtful for sure. Hey, more about you guys. So you guys are both growers. Let's talk about that. So Dave, you're a gardener.
Yeah, it's funny enough. The minute I get off this podcast, I've got a group of 50 different people from CSU, which is the Colorado State University out of Fort Collins. They have extensions offices all around the state of Colorado that help people with their gardens and different aspects of horticulture and just growing things, trees. It's everything from pruning to growing vegetables and plants. And they have a Colorado Master Gardener program. There's a Master Gardener program in most states that I'm aware of. I don't know exactly where, but and it's usually through an extensions program at a state college system. But I've got 50 of those guys coming in here today for a tour, and that's who actually does the Colorado Master Gardeners program, of which I am certified. Me, I'm mostly focused on vegetables. I used to have a few acres just south of town, and I really like growing as much of my own food as possible. I like to be part of that journey from the beginning, so that I really know where my food comes from. And I think Bill, takes it even a step further with his vineyard, and he's actually got a farm with animals and grows quite a bit too. And I think Bill and I have kind of inspired each other over the years, and I think it's really led to a life that when I go up and visit Bill in Palisade, it's mind-boggling and awe-inspiring, because this place is so beautiful and things are just growing everywhere. And it's kind of a neat little life that he's carved out for himself up there. And I'm envious. But yeah, I think And I think for both of us, Bill, you can go ahead and answer, but it's a lot of that journey. And I know, Jimmy, you've done a number of shows where you touch on this too. And I know that you're involved with some of this stuff back in New York at the same time about really understanding your food and where it comes from. And I know obviously you had a few restaurants, and so you've got this aspect to your life too. So I think you kind of know what I'm talking about. But Bill, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Dave.
The vineyard is pretty, it's pretty cut and dried. We grow grapes and get them off to different winemakers. I was growing like kind of the perfect setup for Chateau Anouf de Pop. So Cab Sauvignon, Cab Franc, Malbec, and Counois. And it was 2020, man. Such a great year for everybody, right? But anyway, October of 2020, we had one of these weather events that was just right to be wrong. It was a day of about 72 degrees, and by midnight or 2 in the morning the next following morning, it was down to about 15 degrees. So it was just kind of weather whiplash. Anyway, it caused not all of the vines, but a significant amount that weren't hardened off yet. The trunks basically failed. There's too much liquid up in the trunks to withstand that cold of a temperature, so they split open. So just learning experience. I've just finished replanting about 21 rows, so about two-thirds, a little over half of the vineyard here. And I've replanted with some Austrian varietals that my hope is that these Austrian varietals are a little more cold tolerant, particularly in the fall there. But anyway, Lemberger is in the ground now, and Zweigelt is in the ground too. So I've got a local winemaker that's pretty excited about making it, as well as a local restaurant that's excited about buying the wine after it's made. So that's pretty exciting. And to Dave's point too, my son shows 4-H pigs at the fair, and so we raised some show pigs, and these show pigs that don't quite make the cut, if you will, end up in our pubs. Both the pub that's here in Palisade and the pub that's in Durango will buy these. We'll buy the pigs and custom butcher them for the restaurant, and that's definitely a cool thing. As well as what ends up in our own freezer. So it's pretty cool to know where your food came from and the people that grew it, and kind of the story that here's an 11-year-old boy that put together this beautiful show pig, and walked it, hand fed it twice a day, and walked it every day, and all these great things so it was really treated with love and respect, and no bad vibes at all.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, so then with your spirits, so the Peach, what's it called? Peach Street Spirits?
Yep, Peach Street Distillery.
Are you growing anything that you're distilling with? Tell us about how that works.
We get everything right here from the valley. So we're definitely like grain to glass, fruit to glass, scratch distillery. Like we're really unique that way. But me personally growing it, we're not quite at that level. I just I'm the wine is better off as wine than it is distilled. The little bit of grape spirit that we do make, there's a lot of Gewürztraminer grapes here in the valley that don't really have a home. So we're able to get them a lot cheaper into the distillery. So a matter of economics there, but they are grown right here. I mean, this little valley isn't very big, so it's pretty cool when we talk about like the size. So when we're making bourbon, our corn farmer's 3 miles away is all. And, he brings that corn right over, cracks it at the farm, and then brings it over to us. And we're, mashing it and making sour mash and creating bourbon from that corn. We grow pears inside of the bottles because we know the farmer just right up the road with the pear orchard, and we can go up personally and hang the bottles in the trees and get the pears to grow inside of the bottles for our pear brandy. And
that's
there's
amazing.
some stuff
I
that's
still
really
can't believe
cool.
that actually works, but I've seen it.
We joke around with people and tell them that we assemble the pear inside of the bottle, right? Like the ship in the bottle. But it only sort of works, Jimmy. Like I think we get about a 30% success rate, and we're pretty stoked with that. But that's happening right now. I want to say the guys are out there right now hanging pretty close to 1,200 bottles in the trees.
Wow. So, Bill, one thing you're drinking or that we should drink, either from the Peach Street Spirits or from Ska Brewing? I'm thirsty.
I'm a beer guy. I really I have fun creating the spirits and kind of nerding out on it. But if I'm and I have fun growing the grapes for wine, and I appreciate all the wine varieties. But man, at heart, I'm a beer guy. And to that end too, I'm kind of old school. I like dark beers that are hoppy, so porter. My favorite beer coming out of Ska and always has been is the 10-pin porter.
All right, that sounds good. And Dave, so back to your growing and then what you're going to drink. We're going to close out soon. But so Dave, with your garden, do you ever grow your juice?
I do, totally. Carrots and beets. Absolutely. In fact, go ahead.
Keep going, because I knew you were going to say yes. So
yeah, I don't have the amount of land that I used to have, so I do all raised beds in my backyard now, and half of them is reserved just for carrots and beets. And I try to get started kind of early. We don't have the longest growing season down here, but just because those extreme temperature swings like Bill was talking about that really hit him in the fall of 2020. But so yeah, carrots and beets, and beets are pretty easy to grow. There's a lot of tricks to carrots. They hate competing with each other. So learning how to grow those two vegetables has always been crucial. But and then I like to get what I can as far as the apples from. There's a gleaning program around here, and if you don't know what that is, it's kind of people share their fruit if they have excess fruit on their trees. There's a lot of apples, and there's a heritage apple project, trying to find heritage varieties that might not be so popular that have existed for hundreds of years in Southwest Colorado. So there's a lot of people with old orchards, old apple trees. It's really easy to come by apples. Ginger's the thing I've not really tried. So that I usually buy from the store, but that's the only ingredient as long as I can harvest. Early in the year, I'm buying it from the store, but second half of the summer, I'm harvesting my own beets and carrots and apples for my juice.
Wow, man. Yeah, so Durango, I've heard that where you are, you mentioned apples, it's near New Mexico, right? And that's an area where there were a lot of heritage ciders a long time ago, right?
Yeah. We have some really fun cideries down here. Fenceline are some good friends of ours, and they're really involved in this heritage project, and they know a lot about these old varieties of apples, and it's really neat to go visit them and just learn about some of the special stuff that's really, and a lot of it actually came from like upstate New York and the New York area. There were trees planted here in the 1800s that were brought from immigrants, and it's really neat to kind of get the history and to try to find new varieties around here. And it's kind of fun watching that program and getting into those ciders. I'm not the biggest cider drinker, but I really appreciate apples. And so that's kind of my tie to the cider world down here. But it's neat. And you're right. We're just a couple minutes north of New Mexico. If I took off driving south from the brewery right now, I'd be there in 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like I'm in some old Western story. But I can't even think of the writer right now. But let's just finish up. You guys, one comment each. There must be something that's on your mind, or something that visiting brewers say, or a collab. I see you've got some cool collabs going on. If you want to give a shout out to anybody else, any brewers that are working with you, or
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you just said that, because we're our whole sales team from Colorado and Arizona are in town right now for a 2-day retreat, and they're just wrapping it up right now. And right when we started, one of our sales rep that's with Kansas, one of our old sales reps started Manhattan Brewing Company, and he just dropped by a collab beer we made that I haven't even tasted yet, called Two Tone IPA,
all
that
right.
we're about to ship out there to Kansas. And so I have the first can right here, so I'm really looking forward to trying that collaboration. But love working with other brewers, and actually any other beverage producers, or anything really. Like, we just like collaborating and being able to just share a beer or a drink with our, with kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
And
totally.
when's the anniversary party? What time of year is that?
It's Labor Day weekend this year. So yeah, it'll be Labor Day weekend.
So that
in
is
September.
that something
I think it's the first
that
weekend.
we should all start planning for, if not this year, next year, right?
Yeah, with 100%. You should definitely be here, and we'll take care of you. It'll be fantastic.
Wow.
As long as you reciprocate. I got to get out and spend some more time in New York.
You got it, man. Come out. All these now. It's like all the whole Northeast is like one big kingdom now. So, but you guys are great. Thanks so much for joining me. And Bill and Dave from Ska Brewing and Peach Street Spirits in the western slope of Colorado. Hey, big shout out to Armin Spingen, our engineer, and Alex Tran, our producing intern. Thanks so much for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Woo! Thank you, guys.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.